I want you to picture a room. I can't tell you what it looked like, and that's going to be a theme tonight, the not knowing. But there was a room. I was small, 8, maybe 9 years old, and someone was putting headphones on my head. These weren't the cheap little foam ones from the nurse's office, not the ones you got for the standard hearing test, where you sat and raised your hand when the high-pitched beep happened. I remember those because everybody remembers those. Because they were normal. They were different. The ones I'm talking about, they were big, padded, thick plastic cups that pressed hard against my ears, sealing the outside world completely away. And inside them, and I'm going to try to describe this without overselling it, because I don't trust my own memory, and frankly, you shouldn't either. Inside them, there was a tone. Not music, not a voice, just a flat, steady tone. And then another tone started in the other ear. It was slightly different, just a fraction of a fraction off. And right where those two frequencies collided, in the exact dark middle place in my skull, something began to hum. I sat there. I think I was told to close my eyes. Maybe I was told to relax. And I did, I think. Here's the thing. I have almost no actual memories of the program that room belonged to. I was in it for years, yet all I have left is a handful of sensory fragments, a couple of smells, a few isolated images, and this lingering, unshakable feeling that something about it was profoundly strange. And then a while back, I fell into a corner of the internet where thousands of adults were describing the exact same room. This might be nothing. It might just be a million kids, now grown up, remembering a million different ordinary testing rooms and collectively deciding they were all the same room, simply because the internet told us we could, or it might be something else. And tonight we will try to figure that out together.
I'm your host, Ashley Ford, and welcome back to another episode of This Might Be Nothing But The Gifted Kids.
Let's look at what is actually out there. If you wander deep enough into the digital woods, that is Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, you'll find a sprawling, hyper-specific community. These are people who were placed into public school gifted programs in the 1980s and 1990s, and they all remember the same uncanny things. Heavy headphones, dual tones, flashcards printed with strange symbols, a specific chalky pink drink, periods of missing time, text they didn't understand, and above all, a quiet, curdled feeling of being watched, selected, or deemed special in a way that didn't feel entirely safe. They call it collectively the GATE program, GATE, Gifted and Talented Education. But in this specific corner of the internet, the claim is far more sinister than simple accelerated learning. The theory whispered in these forums is that these public school programs weren't actually designed for enrichment. They claim they were connected to something much darker, a real CIA initiative called Stargate, or the remnants of MK Ultra, or military's deep-seated interest in psychic phenomena. The theory suggests that someone somewhere was using ordinary public classrooms to identify and harvest children with latent paranormal potential. I want to stop here and be very plain with you right at the start. The whole weight of this episode hangs on this distinction. There is absolutely no documented historical evidence that public school gifted programs were connected to the CIA. None. I looked. Investigative reporters have looked. The conspiracy, as a literal, factual accusation, does not hold up. But here's the part that got me. Here's the part that made me sit up at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling while the room grew cold. Because here is what is true. What is on the public record. What you can go read in declassified documents for yourself right now. In the summer of 1972, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America officially began researching psychic powers. Cool. Let that sink in. In the heat of the Cold War, the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth funded a research program to determine if human beings could see across space and time using nothing but their minds. They initially called it parapsychology. Later, they coined a more clinical term, remote viewing. It was the alleged ability of an individual to describe a distant, unseen, or highly classified target using pure focused consciousness. To run this project, the government didn't hire mystics or occultists. They went to SRI International, a highly respected research institute in Menlo Park, California. They hired real credentialed scientists, two laser physicists named Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff. I'm not good at names, okay? And the very first subject they brought into the lab was an artist from New York named Ingo Swann. He walked in, sat down, and told them, "Give me coordinates, latitude and longitude, and I will tell you what is there." They did. And the declassified documents, more than 70,000 pages of them, which are preserved on the CIA Online Connection. The Online Connection. I meant collection. Literally titled Stargate, describe him doing precisely that. He described hidden military facilities. He drew accurate layouts of Soviet targets. He described the weather at coordinates he had no physical way of knowing. That's weird. It's incredibly weird. The CIA certainly thought so. They were disturbed enough and intrigued enough to keep funding the research for more than 20 years. It survived under a shifting change of military code names: Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, and finally Stargate. It wasn't shut down until 1995 after an outside scientific review concluded that while there was statistically significant anomaly, there was no actionable intelligence being produced. We hear that a lot now about things, right? Like the telepathy tapes kind of stuff, where the scientists are like, it's all baloney. I'm also thinking like the Anunnaki, they're like, nah, no way people lived here that long ago. Yeah, okay, science. We'll see. Anyway, end tangent. Among those 70,000 declassified pages, there's one specific document that made the hair on my arm stand up. It's an Army intelligence assessment from 1983, and it details a training protocol named the Gateway Process. Ooh, I think we know about the Gateway Process a little bit. In 2026, I think everybody knows about the Gateway Process. Anyway, the Gateway Process didn't originate in a military lab. It came from the Monroe Institute, founded by a former radio executive named Robert Monroe. Interesting guy. You should read about him. He spent the 1970s experiencing spontaneous out-of-body phenomena. Monroe had patented an audio technology called hemisync, short for hemispheric synchronization. The concept was simple. You put on a high-quality stereo headphones. One ear receives a tone at, say, 100 hertz. The other receives a tone at 104 hertz. Your brain, unable to reconcile these two distinct frequencies, does something extraordinary. It manufactures a third phantom frequency in the middle of your skull, a 4 hertz wave that exists entirely as a cognitive illusion, and they call that, my friends, binaural beats, which you can find tons of now on YouTube. They help sleep. They help you sleep, okay? Just saying. But you need headphones, okay? Anyway, did you catch that? Stereo headphones, a tone in one ear, a slightly different tone in the other, a hum that you perceive in the dead center of your brain. The 1983 Declassified Army report describes exactly this, using binaural beats in the theta range layered with the sound ocean surf to induce altered states of consciousness. The military's goal to see if this audio technology could be used to fast-track the training of remote viewers. To synchronize the left and right hemisphere of a soldier's brain, unlocking hidden perceptual thresholds. I want to be incredibly clear yet again about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am telling you that the United States government spent decades investigating binaural beats, delivered through headphones as a tool for altering human consciousness. I am not telling you that your third grade public school gifted classroom was a secret CIA training ground. That's not what I'm doing. No, definitely not. I'm just saying the room in my memory and the room in those declassified documents happened to have the exact same furniture. So, here's where we stand. We have a real historical government program that studied psychic phenomena and a headphone-induced altered state. We have a modern internet myth claiming those experiments bled into public schools. And we have a generation of adults, me included, who carry fragments of childhood memory that feel like they belong to both stories at once. The real question isn't whether the conspiracy is true, because it almost certainly is not. I'm sorry to say that. The real question is, why does it feel so true? Why does this myth resonate so deeply in our bones? Because I don't think it's random. I think there is a real haunting answer, and it lives at the absolute intersection of three things: cutting-edge science, deep-seated trauma, and the way human minds construct myth out of thin air. Let's take them one at a time. Let's start with the science, shall we? Because if we're going to ask whether something real is hiding underneath the static of this myth, we have to ask a difficult question. Is there any scientific evidence that human consciousness can interact with the world in ways we don't understand? The honest, deeply uncomfortable answer is maybe. A tiny, stubborn, incredibly annoying maybe. When the military formally closed the book on Stargate in 1995, the research didn't just vanish. It migrated into private, quiet institutions. The most famous of these is the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS, founded in 1973 by an astronaut named Edgar Mitchell. Houston, we have a problem. Anyway, Mitchell was the lunar module pilot on Apollo 14. He was the 6th human being to ever walk on the moon. And on the long, quiet journey home, as he stared out the window at the blue marble of Earth rotating in the black void, he experienced a sudden, overwhelming sense of universal connectedness. It changed him. He came back to Earth and founded IONS to study whether consciousness is something generated solely by the brain or if it is a fundamental field that spans across space and time. I think he was onto something with that. We will hold two truths at once. IONS is a real research organization staffed by PhDs, but its core premise, the consciousness is non-local thing, is not accepted by mainstream academic science. And both of those statements are indeed true. One of the senior scientists, Dean Radin, also a really cool guy who you should read about, has spent decades running rigorous controlled laboratory experiments on what he calls presentiment. In these studies, subjects are hooked up to sensors measuring skin conductance and heart rate. They are shown a series of random images on a screen. Most are calm, like a landscape, and a few are highly shocking or terrifying. What Radin and other researchers have reported is that the subjects' nervous systems consistently begin to react. Their skin prickles, their heart rate spikes, a fraction of a second before the scary image is actually selected by the computer. So their biology is reacting to a future event. Radin has also conducted massive meta-analysis of the famous Ganzfeld experiments. These are those classic, slightly surreal 1970s setups. You tape half of a ping pong over the subject's eyes, right? And the room is like full of red, soft light. And they like pump continuous white noise into heavy headphones. Those ones. The setup completely starves the sensory cortex of structured information. While the subject is in this state, a sender in another isolated room attempts to mentally project a random target image to them. Radin argues that when you pull the results of thousands of these trials across decades, the, quote, hit rate, end quote, which is the accuracy of the receiver's descriptions, is consistently and stubbornly just above what pure chance would dictate. But, and there's always a but, in 2011, a highly respected psychologist named Daryl Bem published a paper titled Feeling the Future in a major peer-reviewed journal. He presented what appeared to be solid evidence of precognition across 9 separate experiments. It caused an absolute storm. The scientific community did exactly what it's designed to do. They tried to replicate his results. A statistician named E.J. Wagenmakers argued that Bem's statistical methods were deeply flawed. A team of researchers led by Stuart Ritchie, Richard Wiseman, and Chris French ran Bem's exact protocols and found absolutely nothing. Bem countered with a meta-analysis of 90 replication attempts, claiming the effect was still there. The skeptics shot back that the effect only appeared in poorly run trials and vanished in rigorous ones. I just want to tell you what it feels like to sit with this literature, okay? Because you read the positive papers and a part of you lights up. The part of you that remembers sitting in the quiet room with those heavy headphones on your ears, you think, hey, maybe there is something here. And then you read the rebuttals, the replication failures, and the scientific door just slams it shut. Then another paper opens it a crack. Then a critic pushes it closed. That constant, dizzying back and forth is the only honest way to look at this research. You don't get a clean landing. You just have to hold the question in the dark. And anyone on either side of the debate who tells you they have absolute settled truth is probably just trying to sell you something, honestly. But then I found one study that changed the entire landscape of this investigation, a study that connected the wires between the paranormal and the broken. In 2024, so pretty recently, researchers Cameron and Wade published a paper in the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies. They wanted to know if there was a link between childhood trauma and reported psychic ability. They gathered 227 adults, administered a series of ESP tests developed by the IONS Discovery Lab, and had them fill out a standard clinical questionnaire detailing their childhood experience of abuse and neglect. And here's what they found out. Out of the 4 ESP tasks administered, there was one highly significant correlation. The individuals who reported the most severe childhood trauma scored distinctly differently on one of the cognitive tasks. Not all 4, just one. Let's be completely responsible here. The study does not prove that childhood trauma grants you supernatural powers, so don't try to test it out. That's crazy. It was just a self-selected sample published in a niche transpersonal journal, and the correlation was partial. But it aligns with a long, quiet line of older psychological research. A 1994 study showed that children of alcoholics are statistically more likely to believe in the paranormal. A 2014 study connected childhood trauma and anomalous beliefs mediated by a psychological trait called fantasy proneness. So, what is actually happening here? There is an explanation that doesn't require a single ghost or a single drop of psychic energy to be real, and I think it might be the most heartbreaking truth of all. Trauma changes the physical architecture of the human brain. That is not theory, that is settled in neurology. When a child experiences early chronic stress, their nervous system undergoes a profound rewiring. It produces disassociation, a defensive splitting off from the physical reality to escape pain. It produces intense hypervigilance, a nervous system permanently dialed up to 10, constantly scanning the environment for threats, learning to read patterns and noise to sense change in the room before it happens, because in their childhood, they had to predict the threat to survive. In the language of modern neuroscience, this is a disruption of predictive processing, the Bayesian brain's constant, subconscious guessing game about what is about to happen next. If your brain's blueprint of the world is built on survival, it stops looking for what is actually there and it starts projecting what it needs to see to keep you alive. It sees a predator in a simple shadow. It hears a warning in absolute silence. Those feelings, the sense of presence, the sudden prickle of the skin, the feeling of knowing what someone else is thinking are incredibly, undeniably real to the person experiencing them. The question isn't the reality of the sensation, it's the source. Is it a psychic transmission, or is it a deeply wounded brain shaped by trauma doing its desperate, brilliant best to protect you from a world that wasn't safe? Let's hold both of those possibilities, because now we need to talk about how those raw, half-understood neurological sensations get fed into a machine and turned into a conspiracy.
Human beings are myth-making machines. That is not an insult. It is our primary evolutionary survival tool. We cannot tolerate the shapeless, the chaotic, or the unexplainable. When we are handed scattered, frightening, half-remembered fragments of experience, we weave them into a story, because a story has a shape, a story has a villain, and the Gate Conspiracy is a textbook masterclass in how modern myth is built piece by piece out of very real materials. Let me show you the seams. First ingredient, a kernel of a documented, undeniable truth. The CIA really did fund Stargate. They really did study remote viewing and binaural beats. That is not a theory. It is a line item in a declassified history. And the moment a story has one massive, undeniable truth at its center, it becomes a load-bearing wall. If the government actually studied psychic soldiers, then suddenly the idea that they were testing kids in public schools doesn't sound so impossible. The truth of the first fact acts as a gateway to believing the second. Second ingredient, the fragile, highly suggestible nature of human memory. Memory is not a video camera recording, it is a reconstruction. Every time you recall an event, your brain pulls down the file, edits it, and saves a new version. The present always leaks into the past. This is especially true for childhood memories, dim rooms, half-understood tests, events that happened when you were 7 years old. It is a vast blank canvas just waiting to be painted. Third ingredient, the digital echo chamber. The internet allows isolated people to find one another. If you have a vague, strange memory of headphones in elementary school, you can find a thread where others are discussing it. But the moment you enter that thread, you are handed a pre-packaged vocabulary. you hear terms like pink drink, casino cards, and binaural beats before you've actually finished remembering your own experience. And because the brain is highly suggestible, those details instantly fuse with your own memories. Suddenly, you remember the pink drink too. But there is a fourth ingredient, and this is my absolute favorite because it completely predates the internet. During my research, I dug into archives and found an old yellowed newspaper clipping. It was an editorial written by Phyllis Schlafly, the incredible, influential, conservative cultural commentator of the late 20th century. The piece was titled "Beware of the Gifted and Talented Invitations." In it, Schlafly warned parents about specific gifted curriculum being implemented in New Jersey fourth grade classrooms. She claimed the curriculum included guided imagery exercises, specifically an exercise called Your Mind's Eye, where children were instructed to close their eyes, imagine a tranquil beach, and picture themselves sipping a drink. She claimed teachers were secretly charting the children's psychological responses. She warned that public schools were using these programs to introduce children to clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis. This is some Stranger Things stuff, guys. So let that wash over you, okay? Your mind's eye, imagining a beach, imagining sipping a drink, the pink drink. The column was written decades ago, long before TikTok, long before Reddit, long before any of us were online comparing notes. The very first things the internet is terrified of today are the exact things parental panic groups were terrified of 40 years ago. The fear didn't start on a message board. The fear was already written into the cultural soil. The internet just gave it a modern vocabulary and a place to gather. But there's a fifth ingredient, and this one breaks my heart. It is a generation of real, profound pain looking for an explanation. We've all heard the archetype of the gifted kid. The child who was told early on that they were special, brilliant, and full of limitless potential. The child who grew up into an adult and couldn't figure out how to be ordinary, who burned out, who crashed. There's real developmental psychology here. Asynchronous development, where a child's intellectual capacity vastly outpaces their emotional maturity. Perfectionism, intimately linked to early academic exhaustion, and massive growing clinical conversation about the intersection of giftedness with neurodivergence like ADHD, autism, and complex post-traumatic stress. I noticed a pattern in my own life. Among the people I went through that gifted program with, I still talk to a lot of them. Most of them are not okay. They are brilliant, yes, but they are struggling, exhausted, trying to learn how to exist in the world that they were never actually prepared for. So I did a small, highly informal experiment. I put together an open-ended questionnaire. I designed it carefully so as not to lead or suggest any answers. I sent it to people I personally went through the program with. People who knew the room before the internet told them what to think. Only 5 people completed it. I want to be mathematically responsible here. 5 people is not a clinical study. It's not a representative sample. It is a tiny, highly self-selected snapshot of my own personal circle. It is a warning light on the dashboard and not a clinical trial. But of those 5 people, every single one of them reported having a clinical diagnosis of complex PTSD. 5 out of 5. And one of them, without any prompting from me, wrote this sentence. I remember being told I saw things other kids couldn't, and I remember that being the beginning of me feeling wrong. And there is your 6th ingredient, the one that makes the whole conspiracy cook. A group of adults carrying a deep, unaddressed psychological wound. The pain of being told they were special, only to be dropped into an ordinary and different world, reaching for the most dramatic external explanation for why they hurt. Because I was experimented on by the CIA in a strange, comforting way is far more bearable than I was a normal child who was told a beautiful lie and it slowly broke me. One of these stories gives your pain a shadow cabinet, grand design, a villain. The other just gives you weather. So where does that leave us? I think if I'm being honest, it leaves me somewhere I didn't expect. Somewhere much quieter than a conspiracy and infinitely stranger than nothing.
Here is what I actually believe after pulling the thread to its very end. I believe the CIA really did study psychics. And they really did use heavy headphones and binaural beats to explore the outer limits of human consciousness. That is a matter of historical record. I believe the science of parapsychology remains a tiny, unresolved anomaly sitting right next to a massive, deeply documented set of trauma responses that can produce the exact same supernatural feelings without any magic at all. I believe my memory of the quiet room is real, but I also know it is deeply unreliable, and I will never truly know which parts of it actually happen and which parts I have slowly rebuilt over 30 years, out of fear, nostalgia, and stories I've heard since. And I believe that a generation of gifted kids grew up into adults who are hurting, carrying a very, very real, modern, collective exhaustion. At the start of this episode, I gave you two choices, the conspiracy or the nothing, but I think they are both wrong. I think the truth is a third thing, the quiet, devastating third thing. Nobody had to do anything to us. There is no government agency, no secret project. They just took a group of sensitive, highly perceptive children, many of whom were already carrying the quiet weight of domestic trauma, and they labeled us special. They isolated us from our peers, put us in dim rooms with headphones we didn't understand, ran exercises that felt secret and profound, and then they sent us back into the world we were never equipped to handle. Our specialness curdled into a wound. And now, in our 30s, we are searching for some grand external reason for why we feel so disconnected. The story doesn't need a cartoonish villain. It just needs a school system that thought gifted was a harmless label. A Cold War that left a bizarre vocabulary of psychic experimentation lying around, and a generation of kids with highly sensitive nervous systems who grew up, went online, found each other, and whispered. Did you feel that too? Maybe that's all it is. Maybe that's everything it is. But I'll tell you what I keep coming back to. The room, the hum, the heavy headphones. I don't know what was actually playing in them. I don't know if it was a standard hearing test, a simple relaxation tape, or something borrowed from a 1980s wellness culture that had itself been borrowed from the edges of military consciousness research. I don't know. And I finally made my peace with not knowing, because that is the true nature of myths. They aren't lies. Myths are the survival stories a culture tells itself when the real truth is simply too big, too scattered, or too heavy to hold in one hand. The Gate conspiracy is a myth, but underneath the headphones, the pink drink, and the declassified files, there is a profound human reality. A generation of kids who were told they were special, who grew up not being okay, and who are still trying in the dark to understand why. That is the real story, and it doesn't need a shadow government to be true. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe it was just a million different rooms, a million normal hums, and a million kids who grew up and built a beautiful Gothic cathedral out of the fragments of their childhood memories. Or maybe history left behind a pattern nobody was ever supposed to connect. A real government project, a lunar astronaut, a panicked newspaper columnist, a few highly sensitive nervous systems that never quite came down, waiting in the dark for someone to pull the thread. Either way, I pulled it, and here's what I found at the other end. Not a conspiracy, but not nothing. Just a room full of people holding a question in the dark together. And honestly, that's enough. Done.